I'm David Temple. I'm the president of the Medfield Historical Society, at least until somebody else is willing to take it over. I feel great welcoming you. It's for the first time in 2 long years. This is a live historical society presentation in the basement of the 1789 meeting house. I think you're going to like tonight's program, and it'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. The second line I wrote here is that for your information, there's an air purification machine in the back of the room. It's so noisy and oppressive. We turned it off, and I hope you're okay with that. Okay. I imagine most of you are here, or many of you are here, heard about the presentation through our newsletter, the portal. If you don't already get the portal, you can sign up free. Just go to the Medfield Historical Society .org and scroll down to the bottom of the page. During COVID, the Historical Society necessarily cut back on a lot of activities. The portal is the main way to keep in touch with and inform our members. We went to having Zoom presentation meetings, and it's pretty good, but I like this better. Like, I imagine you all do too. The society building has zero ventilation, and we haven't been open only by appointment for researchers and browsers, but tending back towards being open Saturdays. We have been open the first and third Saturday of the month from 10 to 12. And we'd often go down there and nobody would show up anyway, so it's not a great motivator to bust people's chops if you volunteer and do it. Anyway, our mission is to preserve, promote, and share Medfield's rich history. There are a lot of other things that we could be doing to further this mission, but we don't have the man or woman power to do it. I'm planning on having a board meeting later on this month, and we have openings on the board, and I plan to invite several people who have expressed interest in working for the society. And what I'm really hoping to find is some self-starters in this audience who like to make things happen. Please grab me after this meeting or email me if that sounds like you. Next month's program on Monday, November 7th at 7:30, retired Judge Tom Connors of Medfield will speak on the legal history of Norfolk County, Medfield, and of Norfolk County and its courts. There's some surprises in it. I didn't realize that Suffolk County and Norfolk County had separated in 1793. There was apparently a lot of rancor over it. It was the city folks and the country folks. And at first, Medfield was proposed to be the county seat, but Tom Connors will also be talking about some notable cases that have been heard in the Dedham Superior Court, including Sacco Vanzetti, the Millens favored police officers. Has anyone ever heard of that one? It happened in the 1930s, but it was a major scandal in Needham. I don't remember any of the details. And the 19th century Jason Fairbanks murder trial, which again has a lot of surprising twists. Neither Tom nor I are very adept at technology, and it would be great if someone here could help with visual aids. Anybody here? Boy, as my brother used to say, don't all speak at once. About tonight's program, Stephen Marini has taught at Wellesley College since 1976. Professor Marini is also, who's also a pianist and choral conductor, made a very significant donation of Lowell Mason papers, music, and memorabilia to the Medfield Historical Society last spring. That's not letting that opportunity pass. I asked him if he would speak at a Historical Society program, and here he is. Professor Marini will be assisted by Lowell Mason's fifth cousin, several times removed. Oh, there she is. Eva Kendrick is a music director. Yeah, this is the trick with Lowell Mason with music directors. As a teenager in the early 1800s, and Eva, 200 plus years later, is now a music director. So the heir to Lowell. Okay, so take it away.
Corn. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I think I'll just launch in. If you enjoy attending concerts of classical music, if you support the teaching of music in public schools, if you sing in a traditional church choir or congregation, if you have used a hymnal with text underlay, like the pages in front of you, if you know the tune to Nearer My God to Thee, or Blessed Be the Tie That Binds, or When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, or My Faith Looks Up to Thee, you are indebted to Lowell Mason. He influenced all of those activities. He profoundly shaped most of them. He wrote those tunes, which were among the most popular in American religious history. He is Medfield's most famous resident, though there's an argument that David and I have been, well, not an argument, just a conversation that we've been having. Some would favor Hannah Adams, a famous writer, whose view of the world's religions in 1794 I read in graduate school, not for its up-to-date coverage, not that old, but for what it was, which was the first American attempt to do that, to do comparative religion in any meaningful sense. Not bad at all. And then we also thought that Matt O'Coin might be a candidate, especially if he writes La Boheme, something like that. The wonderful young opera writer. Mason's career intersects many major American figures in American culture. He was a huge figure in the mid-19th century. But there's only one biography of him, and frankly, it's still a matter of piecing together his career and his activities. Most of his papers, the big collections at Yale, but there's not been, I don't really believe, a significant interpretive, juicy treatment of him. I'm not going to necessarily give you one tonight, but I'm at least going to try to outline what would be entailed were one to do that. Why me? This donation that I made, David kindly mentioned, was my pleasure to do. But I should also give you full disclosure. So one piece of full disclosure is that I grew up with Lowell Mason's hymns in my fundamentalist church near Philadelphia. We sang him all the time, along with his associates and students' compositions, which, surprisingly enough, also included gospel hymns, the early gospel hymns from the 1870s and 80s. That's where they went after Mason's original style. However, the other full disclosure is that I've been singing, writing, and leading, and writing about the music that preceded Mason, that still has its advocates, singing school music that he learned himself here in town in the first decade or two of the 19th century, that he came to change, that he decided was not adequate for proper Christian worship. There's a lot in that sentence. We're going to unpack that. So the singing school folks who sing from a tune book called the Sacred Harp, which several people here have in their hands, old oblongs, call Mason the leader of the Better Music Boys. And that tells you, in a nutshell, what's going on. Mason brought European style, performance style, repertoire, and sensibility, theology of church music to America, almost single-handedly, and had a huge impact in spreading it through elite Protestant churches up and down the East Coast and down the Ohio Valley in the early Republic. That's one of his achievements, but only one. However, since music is the hallmark, I think it's appropriate that we hear one of his tunes before we do anything else. And this gives us Eva to do it. I'll move this stuff out of the way. And it's got to be the song that wasn't sung on the Titanic, but that was sung more than any other tune that he wrote. It's in more hymnals in any case, nearly 700 of them, which is a lot of hymnals, a lot of denominations. And it's Nearer My God to Thee, 1 and 3. All right. So that's Lowell Mason. That's the style we're talking about. Simple phrasing, simple direct melodies, simple, easy to sing, though not completely easy. Set not high in the range. It actually has an early American feel to it, but it is not like the stuff that preceded it. And there's just a little touch of Euro harmony in there. Just enough to make it different than what preceded it. So that we'll get to at large. But first, I want to give you some proper local history. And you come to a town and you speak before the Town Historical Society, and you better read something about who lived on what street, what were their neighbors, what did Dad do? I mean, this is important. This is local history. So, Lowell Mason's father was Thompson Mason. He was born in 1767 to one of the original Medfield families, of which there were numerous. I didn't get to check this, but I get the impression that this was actually a congregational settlement. I'm not sure whether that was true, but there were a batch of them that came all at the same time. Usually in the 17th century when that happened, as in the case of Dedham, down the road, they were coming as a religious company and moving in and restricting immigration, by the way. Anyway, the Masons were among those. He was, clarification?
At the beginning,
Yeah.
people to join to live in Medfield were have to be free of erroneous opinions.
Yes, it's very much like Dedham. Yep. And they knew what those were. That's the thing. Yeah, lots of democracy then. Okay, so he was commissioned a militia captain in 1800 and rose to the level of lieutenant colonel. They were an original Arbella family. They sailed with John Winthrop, the original settlement company of Boston. So this is about as Yankee as you can get. He was a state representative. He was a merchant. He ran a dry goods store. And he hit it big when he figured out a process to make bonnets out of rye straw. So you're growing rye, you harvest it, and the straw you weave into hats. These are hats for ladies and hats for horses. And he sold both, and I don't know which was more profitable. But it became the town's leading business for a while. So he was a figure. He was a figure of economic significance. And then he developed a machine to do all these processes. So he was mechanical. He was the town clerk for 15 years and was a selectman and eventually a state representative before he passed on. In 1791, he married Catherine Hartshorn, known as Katie, also from an original Medfield family. And they lived for years in the old family homestead that you doubtless know about off North Street. So they moved in with their parents and stayed there. Lowell grew up right there. He also grew up next to his neighbors, which included the family of Hannah Adams, whom he knew, and the family of Thomas Prentice, who aficionados of this congregation will know was the minister of this congregation in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. So his neighborhood had significant cultural figures in it. This is Medfield. This is like 600 people. That was what was going on in towns like Medfield, actually all over New England, but some had more talent than others. He went to town schools when he studied also under Reverend Prentice. That happened. Prentice was the schoolmaster. That happened all the time. So I want to talk a little bit about religion and music, which are the two biggest interests and accomplishments in his life. This is where it starts getting complicated. His family attended this church under Thomas Prentice. The moving figure was Katie, his mom. Katie was Orthodox. And if Lowell is any indication, she was very Orthodox. His theology, with a little bit of modification, his theology stands in the line of Jonathan Edwards. He's 3 generations later, but they're still pounding away at evangelical Calvinism. Predestination, election, original sin, infant damnation, the works. The works. He bought every bit of it, and I will show it to you in a moment. So she has all the children baptized. These are unchurched folks. Around 1800, they all come here. Her husband was not so sure about predestination or election or total depravity, but she prevails with Lowell, who's the oldest son. So that's that story, at least as it goes. The church was gradually becoming Unitarian, slowly but surely, which means we have to talk about that just briefly. You all probably know this. But Unitarian means one God and no Trinity. They reject belief in the three persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as superstition, very bad Greek philosophy, an error of the Christian church. So they don't believe in the divinity of Christ. Do they believe in resurrection? Well, they can. But Jesus is, at best, he's not even semi-divine. He's a human being. He's a prophet. He's a seer. But he isn't the Son of God and the Savior of humanity. Took a long time to get there in the 18th century, but that's where they got. And the Trinitarians go, oh no, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and keep banging their head against that impossible logical puzzle of the Trinity, which goes way back, goes back at least to the 2nd century. So it's a mystery. Great. So you have faith and reason arguing it out here in Medfield. Dad seems to be more on the reason side. Mom is definitely on the faith side. So the Masons leave around 1820 as this parish becomes more and more formally Unitarian. They leave to found First Congregational Church. And they're original members. So they're orthodox. His music is just native to the guy. As a kid, he plays the clarinet, the viol, the cello, the flute, the piano, the organ. A little later in life, when he's still a young man, he met up with a band conductor who let him try to play all the wind instruments, and he mastered them all. He's got it, is all. He's just got it. His mom and dad both sang in the choir. Dad was a bass, and he plays the bass viol. So Lowell studied music with Amos Alby, the immortal Amos Alby, the compiler of the Norfolk Collection of Sacred Harmony, 1805. Norfolk County, not long after the separation. He was a local, Alby, and he published it here. He also knew singers, composers, singing masters, and instrumentalists around. There was plenty of music culture here in 1800. So he learned music, first training, musical notation, something about vocal production in what were called singing schools. Singing schools were run by singing masters. And the town or the parish would hire these guys to come and teach folks to read music, how to make a decent sound, how to make an ensemble in parts, while using music that was lyrically edifying for spiritual uplift. John Wesley, Charles Wesley, Isaac Watts, hardball evangelicals, because it's New England. It's New England Congregationalism. And tunes that are from the English local tradition, the English country parish tradition, and by this time, tunes being written by Americans for the first time, beginning in the 1760s and 1770s, around the most famous figure of these guys, William Billings of Boston. That's where original musical composition in America began, was right here with Billings. These compositions were more ornamental, they were more experimental. Billings said, every composer should be his own carver, by which he meant, I'm going to whittle this piece the way I want to whittle the wood. You can do what you want, I'm going to do what I want. I feel myself not bound by any rules of music, said Billings. And he wrote an incredibly broad range of tunes and styles, all kinds. The favorite one, for those of us who sing it still, were fuguing tunes, which are basically hymns. And then you stick on an extended section in which the parts separate and come in separately. The harmony gets complicated. The words get garbled. It goes up and down. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with rhythm and harmony, and miraculously, they come out together at the end. Hurrah! So these were fun. These were entertaining. Singing schools were legitimate venues for courting. I go on forever on this. I've written a lot about this, but in any case, men sat opposite women. This was an edifying thing for young people to learn. Ergo, a lot of couples came out of singing school, and a lot of families. So it was social, it was religious and spiritual, it was musical. And it went gangbusters for 50 years or more, from about 1760-ish or so, well into the 1830s. Okay? Mason studied at singing schools here. He taught his first one in 1807. But he wasn't satisfied. He was essentially a local prodigy. He did direct the choir here when he was 16 to 18. He composed his first piece when he was 20 for the ordination of the Unitarian minister Ralph Sanger in Dover, where I lived for 22 years. All right, so he's growing up. And he marries a local woman, Abigail Gregory, and things are going fine, but he's basically, he said later, I'm just making music. I'm having a great time of making music. Well, he's 22 years old. He just got married. It's time for old Lowell to earn some money. So it turns out he has his father's business acumen, and of all places for a guy from Medfield to go, he goes to Savannah. Yes, Savannah. That would be in Georgia. That's Savannah. There is no place further from Medfield in America than Savannah, both literally and culturally. He does some business activity. He comes into a job at a local bank, begins to do rather well as a businessman. Remember that, because this man made a fortune doing what he did. Wasn't just a poor musician. It's part of the story. So he is dissatisfied with local musical taste. He gets involved with Savannah's first public school, and he's very religious. He helps found the Georgia Bible Society, the Georgia Tract Society, the Georgia Home Missionary Society. These are all evangelical volunteer organizations. People would get together. They would say, we need everyone to have a Bible. And they would raise money to buy Bibles, and then they would go and vend them. Their agents would walk around trying to sell Bibles for a penny a week, so that the unwashed and unregenerate could have the Bible, and then they could bombard them with tracts, invite them to churches, and try to get them to convert. It worked like crazy. So he's involved in all this kind of thing. So one of the items that I was able to contribute is this little double card. I have in my hand a card or two. Okay? See? It's his hand. It's his hand. I don't think I can pass it around. It's just too many hands. It's very fragile. But this is something that looks to me like he carried in his coat pocket. And it's from 1813. It's just at the time he's going to Savannah. And the first one says, from 1813, to be carnally minded is death. I read this to you and it was like, thwomp. It was hilarious. Savannah, May 16th, 1813. Believing that by the influence of God's most Holy Spirit, the glorious work of regeneration has been begun in my depraved heart. How Calvinism, I do at this time, imploring the aid of divine grace, most solemnly devote myself and future life to the service of Almighty God. You have your driver's license in your wallet. This is what this guy has in his wallet. What's in your wallet? Yikes. So I won't read it all, but this is heavy duty. The next one says, prepare to meet thy God. Now, whether Lowell was anxious about his salvation or not, I don't know, but these are, I will never do anything which I would not wish to perform if Jesus Christ, the Son of God and Savior of man, were personally present. He's that kind of believer, right? It's not even what would Jesus do. What would Jesus say if he were like Son of God, right? Etc.
Is there a sense that he just kind of kept this as a reminder of how he wanted to live his life?
I think so. These are like mottos. These are like, just in case, just in case. He endorses the Trinity. I believe in original sin. I think that's clear. Original sin, justification by faith, which is the gift of God, and of course establishes election, predestination and election. I believe the sinner is his own destroyer. And the way that one will be saved, that one can will to be saved. That's the one concession he makes, is that there is free will. Which, anyway, okay. So that's Lowell in Savannah. Oh boy. So, not surprisingly, this musician, cum banker, is a musical talent. The Presbyterians grab him. They're Calvinists too. So they grab him and he becomes the organist at the Independent Presbyterian Church of Savannah. This is an independent evangelical congregation. They're not related to the Presbyterian denomination any other way, except there's a bunch of Georgia Presbyterians who decided to get together and make a church. So that's what they did. He later decides that church isn't orthodox enough, and he leaves to found another even more conservative Presbyterian church in Savannah. Okay, so the point I'm trying to establish here is that he is in no way innovative, original, or progressive in his theology. So you've got a traditional convert type evangelical Calvinist, and he never changes. He lives to be 80. He never changes. So you've got Orthodox, at least New England tradition Orthodox, intellectually, theologically. But musically, he's not satisfied with this singing school stuff that everybody's singing and having a good time with. It's not serious enough. It's not appropriate for divine worship. Oh boy. So, where does he go for an alternative? He finds an immigrant from Germany, Frederick Abel, we'd say, who was a cousin of a really very well-known German composer, Carl Friedrich Abel, who taught him classical and romantic music, which was revolutionary, radical, strange, and almost unknown in America. He encourages Mason to compose his own hymn tunes and anthems, and he endorses Mason's idea to make a compilation, a tune book. Hold up the oblongs again, right? A tune book that looks like that. They're oblong, they're music scores, okay, with words under them, but that's how they're oriented, of his own selection. And Mason says, I want to do what Bartholomew Brown did in the Bridgewater collection of sacred music. That would be the lawyer Bartholomew Brown from Bridgewater, Mass., who published the tune book. And it had a high proportion of Euro music. A little Handel, a little Bach, a little Mozart. Very racy. And what's the market for this? Well, it's for towns like Medfield, actually, that are starting down the road of American Enlightenment. Unitarianism is a progressive reform, social reform movement that finally splits off from the congregations in 1824. And it's been bubbling for the previous 50 years. Here, right here. Well, in music, the same sort of thing has been happening. The Trinitarians and the old guard has been dominant, utterly dominant, for years and years and years. But there's this small group led by immigrants, most of them immigrant musicians, who want to introduce European style practice, compositions, vocal production, and theory, which the singing schoolmasters knew little about because they were functioning from a 16th century theoretical model that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages. So they were out of date. This is all modern. Brown said, let's do some of that. And Hastings, Thomas Hastings, was the leading Presbyterian church musician of his generation, and he wrote about taste. He wanted Presbyterians to develop their taste. Church music should only be for church. It should be simple. It should be unaffected. It should be supported by organs. Kids ought to learn it. Hastings wrote about this, and Mason took it in. So he did. So he compiled this tune book. So now I had to find a publisher. Comes back to Boston. He's still in Savannah. And another stage, the next stage of his life begins. He comes back to Boston in 1821 and meets with the leaders of the Handel and Haydn Society. That very same Handel and Haydn Society, right? Now in its 100 and whatever year. Those guys, they had been founded in 1815. They were still rolling. And they had published their own collections of sacred music. And Mason shows him his Europeanized collection. And they say, this is really pretty good. They had heard about him. This guy's very persuasive. He's a salesman. He's good. They give him a contract. He publishes it. It's the Boston Handel and Haydn collection of church music, not sacred music. Sacred music, you could sing from the Mozart Requiem if you wanted to. Church music is got to be appropriate to Boston churches, and that's more conservative. But he's pushing this Euro thing. And he insists that church music needs to be scientific and correct harmonically, meaning he knows what correct is. Billings's experimentalism is out for Mason. There's a right way to do this. The Euros know. The Euro masters know. And that's what we ought to be doing in our churches. Let's get on the stick here. Boom. So, traditional theology, innovative Euro music, together in one figure. Usually it's kind of one or the other. It's liberal theology in Euro music or traditional theology in the old-fashioned music. That's what he's doing. And that is a formula that works. It works in the cities of early America. They're very excited. H&H thinks he's great. They want to bring him back. He gets an overture from Boston, from one of the rising young ministers in Boston named Lyman Beecher. Beecher might be a name you've heard of, as in Harriet, Edward, Henry Ward, and of course, old Lyman himself, one of the great revivalists of his day, and founder of Lane Seminary in Cincinnati, where he tried to avoid the slavery controversy, but all of his students waded in up to their eyeballs. So it was a hot spot in the slavery controversy. And Beecher wrote this impassioned sermon called A Plea for the West. What do you suppose he's pleading for? His conservative evangelical Calvinist religion is what the West needs to be civilized. And along with it comes Euro music. Whoa. Haydn in Cincinnati. Mozart in Louisville. Are you kidding? These are very raw places. It's a cultural program. It's a civilizing venture that combines music, progressive music, with traditional religion. Suitable for a Protestant elite that is at the top of the social hierarchy in these rising cities of the West, and of course in the East, where they are entrenched. Okay. Well, eventually, Handel and Haydn and Beecher finally make him an offer that he accepts. It's the fourth offer they make. He turns them all down. Price keeps going up. Finally, they offer him the presidency of the Handel and Haydn Society and the music directorship. Now he's got the nation's most outstanding musical organization is now his. He takes it. He comes back. And he starts. And they were beginning to fade, and he started putting on concerts that people just absolutely loved. They went bananas for. Handel and Haydn. And by 1830, they're back on their feet and doing what they still do. So this is 1826, 1827. We're getting into the prime of his career. And Beecher asks Mason if he would give a little talk about his ideas about church music. And he does. It's called the Oration on Church Music. And he basically blows up the singing school. It's a very famous document. He says, among other things, that church music should be oratory. Oratory. Well, oratory in the sense of it needs to be delivered with a proper dignity, gravitas. Okay? But oratory, the Latin for oratory, also means prayer. So it needs to be prayerful as well as grave. The oration on church music. It needs to be simple, chaste, correct. It must promote congregational singing. It is true it needs to be led by organs and choirs, so he isn't throwing out the choirs. And music education for children is the only means of genuine reform to bring this new music into society. Music education. So this is published. He comes to Boston. He carries on this, war with singing schools, and just starts publishing up a storm of music collections and essays and orations. And the guy is just like hyperactive for the next 15 years in Boston. And he's very, very influential. And his most important achievement in Boston and in Massachusetts is to complete from scratch a campaign to install music instruction in the public school curriculum. He's the guy who did it, almost single-handedly. So he starts by holding, like, I don't know what you'd say, urban civilized singing schools. People are still learning how to sing, they're learning how to read music. The theory they're getting is European, the tunes they're getting are European. And people are flocking, he's getting power. He's teaching 200, 300 kids at a time. Everybody loves it. There's a vogue for singing, like there was a vogue for piano a little bit later. We're still in the singing mode. He establishes the Boston Academy of Music to house these things. He gets money, he buys a building, he hires other teachers. This is just rolling. So he says to himself and to the Boston School Committee that they should contemplate the addition of music to their curriculum. Now, the Boston Public School Committee is not what we have today. That may not be a bad thing, but in any case, it depends on your politics and your idea of Boston schools. But these were Protestant mandarins in the city of Boston, ministers, commercial leaders, docs, lawyers, who ran the public schools for Christian edification, for the education of Christian citizens, Protestant Christian citizens. That's what it was. And it stayed that way until the Catholics challenged it around the Civil War, a little bit before. Which, by the way, the challenge, which the Catholics lost initially, was the school board was defended by Henry Fowle Durant, the founder of Wellesley, which our students don't know. So he was another one of these guys, same kind of guy, elite congregationalist. Anyway, sidebar. So it's really interesting because this guy has got a very conservative theological headset. He's got a really open mind on music. What's he going to say about education? The odd thing is that he's very, very progressive about music instruction. So I don't know if any of you know the name, and you may not. I can see why you might not. Johann Pestalozzi. Pestalozzi, the early kind of Enlightenment education theorist from whom there's a straight line to Maria Montessori. Okay? It's that kind of instruction. It's experience first. You do, then you think. Experiences come first, then the understanding. Teaching is based on the instructor understanding the child, not making the child understand the adult. Teaching should be natural. It should be wholesome. Students need to learn and think independently. And in so doing, they will intuitively come to wholesome religious and moral values. There's a lot of Rousseau in this, but Pestalozzi put it together after Rousseau in a little different way. And he's all over the place in Europe and America, and that's the instruction that Mason says we ought to do in the Boston public schools for music. Wow. Yikes. But he's packing in all these students. He does a demonstration with 1,000 kids singing a little program of 7 tunes. It is said that he wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. I'm not sure he did, but but he published children's songbooks as part of this, and it's going in the Boston Music Academy, and the Boston School Committee finally says, sure, let's do it. Let's do it, Lowell. Why don't you do it, Lowell? So he becomes the superintendent for music instruction in the Boston Public Schools, 1838. Wow. So when I said at the outset, if you believe in music education in the public schools, I wasn't kidding. Because it's been that way wherever it still exists. Mason would never have said that tax and funding considerations should be relevant. This is a moral and spiritual and aesthetic and human activity. But I digress. I do a lot of that when I teach, and you're beginning to get the idea. Okay, this is music education in the full modern sense. And he's got assistants, he's got a department, he's got secretaries, he's got gazillions of students. He continues and he writes and he publishes tons of publications for young people, always with that traditional moral lyric and with catchy tunes from all over the place. He writes them, he borrows them. In these years, he travels to Europe. It is often said that Mason was the first European-trained American musician. That isn't true as far as I can tell. He learned from Abel in Savannah. Well, that probably counts. But when he went to Europe in 1837, he was already a celebrity. And he was greeted by some eminent musical and educational and political figures. And it's not like he sat at the foot of Mendelssohn and suddenly had an epiphany. That wasn't it. That just wasn't it at all. I mean, he attended the premiere of Schumann's Third Symphony. He's hanging around, right? He's doing okay. But he was already well established. The European-ness came out of his own exposure, but not from like being in Berlin and studying with the masters. Okay, so his last years in Boston, till 1851, he's like everywhere. I mean, if you were sitting in the city, and there was a notice in the paper, and it was Lowell Mason will conduct Haydn on Sunday, you're likely to say, again? This guy is still around? I mean, what's up with this? Well, he was just relentless, very successful. So he and Abigail's 4 sons married by the 1850s, and he joins forces with Horace Mann, famous educational reformer, and Horace Mann brings him in to teach music at Mann's famous summer institutes for teachers. Now these are actually the beginning of normal schools, which preceded state university education departments. So how you train teachers. So now the state is training teachers, the whole state, to do music instruction. And there's Lowell with 100 kids saying, here's how you do it. He does this for 17 years. Teaches a generation or two of just, your local schoolhouse teacher in do, re, mi. I know what a flat and sharp is. I know what major and minor is. And here, sing out of this book, which he happened to publish. Hello. It's not like he had a contract with the state, but and they're growing. They're growing. They're growing. They're spreading. This model goes to New York, and his friend George F. Root, who wrote some great gospel tunes, but was his young associate, does the same thing with normal schools, music schools in New York City and New York State. And this just spreads up and down the coast and down the Ohio Valley. So his ideas about church music remain constant. And his final published statement about it is worth just hearing. If any of you are in congregations or in choirs, the choir should help or be the servant to the people. It should not be a performance venue per se. Performance is fine, but you're always trying to edify and educate. The choir's role is pedagogical. It is not performative, strictly speaking anyway. The Christian church has gone back and forth between choirs and congregational singing. We should have both. The most important influence in the selection of music is the pastor. Not the style, but what kind of music do you want? It's got to be in harmony with the text and the sermon. It's got to be integrated. You don't preach on the raising of Lazarus and sing Vivaldi's Gloria necessarily at the same service. And everyone should consider it a Christian duty to unite in worship song. It's a moral obligation. Now, I'm just going to say that my most recent book concerned English country parish music, and reformers there who wanted these local parishes to upgrade their tone, their style, their function, and their definition of what sacred music is. It's the same thing. It's the same program. Now, I don't know if Mason knew this, but I know this. And I know who started it, because it turns out to be this fairly obscure composer from Newcastle, way up north, Charles Avison, who wrote an essay on musical taste. 1753. These guys are all following the same basic program. The rustics need to settle down, they need to get better trained, and music has to slow down, get less ornamented, less folky, no penny whistles, and be grave and carry the burden of the text. Anyway, it's very interesting that way to me, anyhow. Well, so we're almost done. You'll be glad to hear. He continues to innovate. In 1859, his Sabbath Hymn and Tune Book was the first hymnal. I was surprised. It just didn't sound right to me, but I read it somewhere. It might be right. The first hymnal to do this. Instead of going horizontal, you go vertical. And you put the words right underneath. Tune books had words underneath, but hymnals were worded. They only had lyrics. And you had lyrics in a tune book. Now there's a lovely way to try to do anything in the middle of a service. Yikes. And he could do this because of the invention of stereotype printing. The hymnals used to be printed with musical type, like Gutenberg. One flat at a time. One, you put the note in, you put the staff in, you put the flag in, and then you put the 5 lines. Endless, ridiculous. Stereotyping, you could set a whole page of music by essentially engraving it and then pouring hot type metal, and you could print whole pages. Bang, you save hours and hours and hours, and you just go crunch. You just crank them out like newspapers, and newspapers love this technique. So he's using newspaper techniques to publish books. Why? He's selling hundreds of thousands of books. So this is something to keep in mind about Lowell Mason. Okay? And he's doing technological innovation, publishing innovation. He's in New York, right? Harper Brothers has already started. The print revolution in America, mass marketing of print, is underway, and he's right on the wave. Lowell had a habit of doing that. Okay, so And his last stage of a career is, I'll get to in a minute. But I think I want us to think just a little more about his music. I know there's time, but now there will be more entertainment. It'll wake you up. And so one of his tunes, the second most popular tune that he ever published, is a tune called Boylston, and it's not on your sheet because I didn't know whether I would have enough singers to bring it off. But my lovely colleagues in our singing group, Norumbega Harmony, have turned out in sufficient force that we're going to give it a shot. So we're going to now come up and sing Boylston for you. The lyric is, my God, my life, my love. What is it?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. It's 147.
Yeah. What's the first line?
147 top. That's right. I got it.
My God, my life. My God, my life, my love.
My God, my life, my love. And it's by Isaac Watts, the great English evangelical. So it's not exactly a pickup group. We've been singing together for 40 years. But Eva's joining us, and that's cool. We like that. All right. All right, let's do it this way. Billy, you're going to do that? So, do we have a tone? Ready? Shapes, yeah? So this is old singing. This is a singing school version. So we're going to sing the notation that the singing schools used before Mason. So let's do it in shapes. Here we go. And. Thank you. All right. So that's a peace offering from a singing school group singing Lowell Mason, which doesn't happen very much. Okay, so we're just about finished. Let me give you some speculative conclusions. Mason was a characteristic and leading figure of New England and Northeast and East Coastal cultural leadership before the Civil War. He asserted urban elite taste over rural tradition. He maintained theological traditionalism on the one hand, and on the other blended it, and this I think was the key, with European musical and educational styles. When you listen to him, though, it's like he's doing the front end of those singing school tunes and not the fancy doo-dah. It's like he cut it off, calmed it down. Very simple, very rectilinear. He was an advocate of civic improvement through public educational efforts, especially music. He loved kids. He worked with them all the time. He was an entrepreneurial success. He's part of the antebellum mercantile capitalist elite, which was rolling before the Civil War kicked it up to a whole new level. He was brilliant at marketing. It's not what you usually get from a musician. He adapted old products, tune books, into new forms. He used technological innovation. This sounds like the grand old days of the Republic. It's like freedom's ferment. That's what this is all supposed to be. He sold 1 million books. Yeah, wow. That's very serious. Very serious. It's a hell of a lot more than Melville sold. He sold like 5 copies of Moby Dick. He was what you would call, we today would call an influencer, especially in terms of music and in terms of education. And even more broadly, I thought about this coming over. He's a little early. He's like one step before, but I think in a mode that we can also recognize with the architect H.H. Richardson, whose buildings are hereabouts. A new style for the new rising republic that combines old models, new models, eclectic. He reminds me of Frederick Law Olmsted, who is creating Euro-style space in the new American city. And this is a really strange one. He reminds me of Henry James. Why? Because James was writing about the European cultural model and the American struggle to adapt it to it and to adopt it for good or ill. And there were stories there. So that's where I'm going to place Mason as my conclusion and let you think what you will of Medfield's most famous person. But before we leave, I think we should all try to sing his famous, some of you will know it, hymn tune, Dennis, to blessed be the tie that binds. He was about community, and so should we be. So here we go. Let's do 1 and 3, 1 and 4, first and last. If you don't know it, here it is. You know, his tunes are short, too. This is a great advantage. There's those Euro 7s. Rise, please. Sure, let's go. Bless thee, the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. The fellowship of faith in love is high to God's love. For much. There you go. Leave them singing is my motto. Thank you all very much.
Can you take questions?
Yeah, sure. Can we keep going? Sure. If you have the endurance.
I just want to make sure I understand the relationship between the music that the group sang and the other pieces.
Oh, yeah.
So was that musically more in the style of the Sacred Harp?
No.
Because you also mentioned Lowell Mason. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get a.
Mason wrote that tune.
Okay.
What happens in the Sacred Harp is every once in a while, a tune like Mason's gets in because it's popular later, and then people say, oh, we love it, let's put it in. It's only 2 lines with sticking on a page. But the Sacred Harp tradition follows earlier choral practice, Renaissance choral practice. The melody is in the tenor, and it is not up top where the sopranos are. So, let's be the time, the sopranos are singing that.
Right.
Well, in that rendition, what are called the leads, the tenor part, is singing the melody. So the resonance, the sound configuration is different because the melody is buried in the middle and the harmony is flanking it top and bottom. Gives you just a different thing. And that's a much older practice, and it's just been preserved all that time. So basically, you would find Boylston in a regular hymnal with the treble, the soprano, and the tenor parts flipped. That's what would happen. Okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, sure. Anything else, anybody?
I have a question. The Medfield Historical Society has Lowell Mason's piano. And I was wondering, I believe it was made in 1850. I don't know where he was living at the time, how we happened to get it. Was he living in Boston?
He left Boston in 51. So
But he lived in Medfield at that point?
he kept up with his old friends.
Yeah.
He visited, he did all of that. He lived, as far as I know, he lived in town, but for one thing, it's possible that he just had it in town and he was leaving, and he dropped it off to one of the Adamses or somebody. This sort of thing happened all the time. But you'd have to find out, and I don't happen to know, but it's great that you have it.
Yeah,
That's
it's not a great piano.
No, it's not a great piano. The same thing is true. Same thing is true for Haydn's. I mean, I played Haydn's harpsichord. It's a nice harpsichord, but it ain't anything special. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
So
Yes.
you managed to tell this whole story and talk only about the men.
I know.
But David is here, I know he had kids, and you did mention that he had 4.
Yep.
And I looked to see when they were born. They were born in 29 and 31. So did
Yep.
he have the kids when he was back here up in Boston, and did he go to Europe by himself, or?
An appropriate question from a Wellesley grad, and not an unexpected one from a Wellesley professor. So there just isn't a whole lot in the material because it's all like redemptive domesticity for women. It's the early 19th century, so she just took care of the family, and he went out and sold 1 million books. It's just, there was obviously much more to that. I think the main women's story in all this is Katie, his mom, who really, she does the traditional women's role, instill the faith in, and boy does it work, and look what happened. So there's that. The family, he went twice to Europe. The first time in 1837 he went by himself, leaving her. And when you go to Europe, you go for months because it takes you forever to get there and back. They both went together in 1852. And in 52, he was really lionized. And so she was there too, and they met.
Empty nest travel.
Yes, exactly so, exactly so. They apparently both enjoyed it very much. It seems to be a very strong relationship. But I don't personally know of any evidence where she's influencing him or participating in all of this. I just don't know. My guess is, of course, because there almost always is, but
But she went with him to Savannah.
She went, oh yeah, she went with him to Savannah.
But she was from here?
She was from here. They got married right before, and then they were down there, yeah, and the kids were getting born and all that. So she accompanied him in his life's journey, for sure.
Was he involved at all in abolition, one way or the other?
Another good question, and we would all want to know about that. I don't know of any political activity, and wow, it's interesting. The first thing I think of is the Lyman Beecher connection. Beecher's children were all abolitionists. Beecher himself was anti-slavery, but he was not abolitionist. He was in a borderlands location in Cincinnati. He didn't want folks coming across the river and burning his seminary down. So he's one of that long generation that is doing the juggling act. I talked to my students today about from the Compromise of 1820 to the Compromise of 1850. The United States Congress just played footsie with the slavery question. They just simply did. If you want to bring in Maine, you got to bring in Missouri. Slave free. And they just balanced it out for 30 long years while the Republic went to hell, and eventually, kaboom. So, Daniel Webster, another example. Even Calhoun, John C. Calhoun, compromisers, keep it in balance, or be agnostic about the whole issue if you're in a vulnerable place. The Presbyterians were at war over this. He didn't want to get into that. The Congregationalists were pretty clearly on the anti-slavery side, but there were plenty who weren't activists, who weren't abolitionists. So if you're a church musician, you don't go there. Anyway, he didn't. But I think you can understand a context as for why. Richard.
Steve, 2 sentences out of Wikipedia, and it ends with a note that says citation needed. But it says this is him in Savannah. He also became a leader in the music of the Independent Presbyterian Church, where he served as choir director and organist. Under his initiative, his church created the first Sunday school for black children in America at the now historic First Bryan Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. Citation needed.
Yep. I have seen that. He also came around to endorsing an early black composer. Took a while, but he did. So that's not political anti-slavery. Those are functions of his compassion for children, which goes all the way back in his career and is consistent all the way through. And in Savannah, it hits you right in the face with racism and slavery. So it's to his great credit that he was part of that, and he was. And his endorsement of a black composer and musician feels more to me like the Fellowship of Composers and Musicians than it does a political statement, but you simply can't go all the way down that line, because there was obviously strong intent here. The good elders of Savannah were not happy about the fact that there was literacy being provided for black kids. I mean, it was radical there, and Sunday schools were just getting started. They were just beginning to ramp up during that time, the 1820s. And so there was a way to do this because everybody was opening Sunday schools. So you could say, well, why not for our... And Savannah and Georgia and the Savannah River were historic, really very important historic locations of independent black Baptist churches going back to the 18th century. So there was a black ecclesiastical and religious presence there, some very distinguished ministers. It's probably the case that Mason and his friends thought, we need more literacy. We can jump on this Sunday school thing and provide it. We'll fund it, and we'll try to improve the social and cultural standing of kids whose parents go to this church. Something like that, I would guess, would be in their mind. That would be my assumption. It's a good question.
Who was the black composer you mentioned?
I don't remember. I have it in my notes. I'd never heard of him. So I could get it to you if you, sorry. This one got thrown together.
Are these other artifacts you have here?
I do. We also have the man himself. There he is. You Masonophiles can come up and take a look. This is him in his prime. Lots of images of him. Very famous man. Okay.
House living with me in his house.
Oh, wow. Well, there he is. Wow. Okay, we set? I think we're set. All right, thank you very much.